In the spring of 2015, national attention turned toward unrest in Baltimore following the death of a man named Freddie Gray, who died while in police custody. The media only covered the sensational events that unfolded over a few days' time, but the Delaware-Maryland Synod has been engaged in racial justice ministry since before last spring and will continue long into the future. On April 26, 2015, at the request of interfaith and ecumenical groups in Baltimore, people of faith all across Delaware and Maryland stepped out of their buildings as part of worship for a moment of silence to show solidarity with the people of Baltimore. The next day, tensions escalated across the city, and people of faith across the country began to ask what they could do to support the people of Baltimore. So we asked faith communities everywhere to step out for Baltimore, and the response was overwhelming. Via social media, we received photos and video from more than 75 congregations and organizations that stepped outside of their buildings and prayed for their sisters and brothers in Baltimore, bearing public witness to the way we are truly church together. Some pastors told us that they had wanted to talk about racial justice in their congregation, but they weren't sure how to do it. And this invitation to step out helped to open that conversation in a new way. Throughout the weeks that followed the unrest, leaders in the Delaware-Maryland Synod worked to help bring healing and justice to Baltimore. The Baltimore City Conference organized a prayer vigil where rostered leaders and lay people gathered at Zion Lutheran Church, located on City Hall Plaza, and marched to City Hall, praying and singing, before offering a brief litany for peace and justice. A few days later, during a major protest in front of City Hall, Zion opened up the gates of the churchyard and welcomed in anyone who needed a quiet space to sit or pray, providing water, snacks, and restrooms for more than 1,000 protesters, journalists, and law enforcement officers alike. Later that week, Bishop Wolfgang was interviewed by EWTN, the Catholic channel, as a part of an interfaith panel discussing how faith communities could respond to the crisis in Baltimore. And in the weeks that followed, our synod hosted a racial justice consultation with members of the ELCA church-wide staff, as well as conversations with rostered leaders about how to engage in racial justice ministry in their own faith communities. The Racial Justice Ministry team continued their work, compiling resources for racial justice work and offering their support to congregations in addressing this topic as faithfully as possible. At the end of October, following several months of planning with ELCA church-wide and Portico staff, rostered leaders and lay people took part in a racial justice symposium where they were equipped with tools for their ministries and overall wellness in the midst of times of crisis. They were later joined by the ELCA revival team for an ecumenical revival service. The Racial Justice Ministry team has continued to offer workshops for anyone who wants to learn more about how people of faith can be involved in the work of racial justice. Bishop Wolfgang continues to be a leading voice in conversations on racial justice in the church and the world here in Baltimore. As a member of a group of local faith leaders who have been intentional in their conversations about racial justice over the past year, Bishop Wolfgang was invited to visit Rome at the end of February for an audience with Pope Francis. And this year, on Palm Sunday, he joined the Racial Justice Ministry team for a different kind of Palm Sunday procession. It was a procession through Baltimore City, stopping at places like empty school buildings, the Juvenile Justice Center, street corners, and churches to name the sin of racism in education, employment, housing, and criminal justice. And on April 25th, the one-year anniversary of the unrest, interfaith communities around Baltimore gathered at the Catholic Basilica for a prayer service. Several hundred people were in attendance, marking our unity and connectedness as the city of Baltimore. The work of racial justice is far from over in the Delaware-Maryland Synod and across our country. But, as people of faith, we continue this work because we believe in a God who calls us to seek justice.